And we are recording. So, welcome back, everybody, to the channel. I've got a great friend of mine today. His professional name is Julian Fisher. However, to his friends, everybody calls him Jules. He's former British intelligence. He's just written this fantastic book here, Think Like a Spy. And I'm going to welcome you to the channel. Jules, how are you doing?
I'm great this morning. Thanks, Gavin. And yeah, good to be on the channel with you. Two Midlanders. Made good, and I'm looking forward to having a chat about our shared experiences. We've got an awful lot of crossover in more ways than one.
Oh yeah, I was talking to my wife about how much that our lives are so almost parallel, with us both growing up like kind of. I don't like to use the word underprivileged, but not in the kind of upper class society. Both in the Midlands, both going down a very shady path. And then both of us end up consciously making the effort to kind of get out of the rut that we're in, if you want to call it that, and ending up working in intelligence. It's it's uncanny.
Yeah, I mean, it is uncanny, isn't it? And I think what's really interesting is I wonder whether those people like us who've had a start in life which isn't filled with privilege, and I'm not going to knock my early years. They were great in many ways, but we were not a wealthy family. And I wonder whether the fact that actually to get on in life, you do have to represent yourself. You've got to sort of reinvent yourself to a certain extent. Suits you to a life in intelligence work. Because intelligence work is all about how you present yourself and how you deal with other people. It's all about interpersonal skills, isn't it? And I have a feeling that traditionally, the intelligence officers in Britain used to come from a very small strata of society. Of course, that's no longer something which is sustainable. And actually, the opening up of that world is a really good thing, because diversity brings with it a greater set of interpersonal skills and enables them to tap into people like you and me.
Yeah, it gives us an opportunity, so I'm certainly not going to complain.
No, indeed not. But I mean, it's interesting, again, again, for your viewers, they'll be hearing very different accents here. And I respect you, Gavin, because you stay true to your roots. I could easily slip back into my Birmingham accent. That would probably no longer be authentic. But for lots of reasons, trying to get on in the world in the early 1990s, it made sense for me to move away from having an identifiably Midlands accent. Though I'm sure some people can still spot the twang.
Yeah, I was going to say, so one or two might be able to pick up on it, but you've done an excellent job, much better than me. I've diluted mine a little bit, so I'm not quite as. I still, mostly in England now, I get a lot of people say, "Where are you from?" I can make out an accent, but not 100% sure where. But yeah. I was in the process of trying to do the old "how now brown cow" lessons of learning how to kind of get rid of it entirely.
The elocution lessons.
That's the one.
Yeah, I don't think I ever consciously set about taking elocution lessons or even thinking about it very hard. It was more a case of having left Birmingham relatively young to go to university. I was fortunate enough to go to university at Oxford, and then into companies, firms in my early 20s that were very different from my background. I think I absorbed it, and maybe that's another thing that intelligence professionals do. They absorb the environment in which they're working.
Yeah, and this is the beauty of. I was actually mentioning this the other day, and I think the reason that I've done so well in intelligence myself personally over the years is because I've always felt like I can fit in anywhere but belong nowhere. And that kind of comes from moving around childhood, school to school, area to area, town to town, and I think that's kind of given me that ability. And like you say, when you kind of, I'll say the words "get into character," you do kind of you take on that legend and that persona, you put on a different hat and become a different person for a while.
I like the phrase "fit in anywhere and belong nowhere." I mean, it's sad in its own way. There's a tinge of tragedy associated with that. The sense that you are able to flit from social setting to social setting because actually not one of them really is you being a square peg in a square hole.
Mm-hmm.
But it brings great advantages with it too. Not least the ability to operate across a whole different range of cultures and get to know all sorts of really interesting people.
Yeah.
So I think we've been, on the whole, pretty lucky, both of us, in the way that our careers have developed.
Yeah, definitely. No two ways about it. And I was kind of probably, like yourself, one of the first of the new breeds of kind of, let's experiment with some outside of the usual circle, because, I mean, I'm not sure when it actually kind of, because, I mean, the likes of MI5 and MI6 for many years have been a very much an old boys club. And GCHQ is very, very locked down in very many ways. CIA, on the other hand, are a lot more open to kind of spreading their kind of let's hire a load of people and see where we end up with the diversity factor, you know.
And I think it's worked well for them. Actually, it is. We live in an increasingly interconnected world, and the melding of different cultures, diverse cultures across the globe, means that those services have to be reactive. They have to bring in people from different backgrounds. And you know, they are beginning to do that. They've been doing it for some time now, and I think it's working well for them, particularly for the agency in the US.
Yeah, and I'll give them their due. They are a lot more willing to try. They're a lot more open to try new things, and rather than stick. The British do have a very kind of, this is work. I mean, it's a great way because of the fact that they say, look, this is what works. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Which I kind of get. That's fine. But that the Americans have more of a kind of, okay, well, this works. Let's carry on doing it. But let's also try this in parallel and see if we can get better results. So I like the kind of the openness towards that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess we're a bit more conservative with a small c over here.
Yeah.
And that has some advantages, has some drawbacks. But, you know, we're increasingly living in times where change is being forced upon some of those more old-fashioned agencies, more old-fashioned departments in Whitehall. And you're seeing that. You can see it starting to come through. Yeah. It's probably not very far. The day of the first woman chief, for instance, is probably not very far away. One hopes.
Yeah, I'll say it did happen for MI5 for a while, but I'm going to avoid talking about that one.
Very well.
Yeah. So, I mean, and of course, you know, as you know, in this industry, it can be. I mean, people have asked me in the past, how true is it to the movies? And the first thing I do is smile, and I think, well, first off, it depends on which movie. But in all reality, it probably is one of the most dynamic industries in the world that I can think of. That you know, you have to work in so many ways. Like we were saying about kind of slipping into character, as it were. I mean, just looking at the work that I've done in the past, you kind of, thinking on your feet is probably the ultimate. I'm trying to think of the right words for this, and I'm struggling. Help me out here, George.
It's got a certain spontaneity and flexibility. But the way I would put it is that really good intelligence work is about preparing to be flexible.
Yeah.
You know, you have to know your stuff before you go out in the field. No question about that. You don't try to go operational without preparing in advance. But then being prepared to junk all of that preparation when reality hits. You know, I think we've all been in circumstances where you think you've got the measure of a situation, and very quickly what you thought you understood is something entirely different in reality.
Oh yeah. And
there's a phrase that I've heard used for it. It's the embuggeration factor.
Yeah, so I haven't heard that for years. Yeah, I haven't heard that for years. It's been a long time. That's just brought back a flood of memories. It's
very true, isn't it? You know, we see it all the time.
Yeah, and of course we do this kind of thing. I know I spent a fair bit of time in working in surveillance, and there are always those things where.
Yeah, I thought I recognised you when I first clapped eyes on you, Gavin, and so I'm sure I've seen you appearing me from behind lampposts.
That's the one, yeah. Kind of long Mac hat and kind of thing. So yeah, it was something that we would put so much into, especially if we were working with a nice big team, which was very seldom. But if we did have a nice big team and we had vehicles at our disposal and multiple members of the team, it was really, really great. And of course, Moscow rule number 2: if technology will always let you down. So the first thing that happens is that the radios go on the fritz. If you are lucky enough for the radios to work, and you've taken everything into account, every step of what you think a journey is going to be, you've projected where the journey is going to start, end, and what the middle bit's going to be like, and then all of a sudden, midway through it, the target you're following, the car will break down, and you go, "Oh, now what?"
Yeah, I'll tell you a story about that. I was involved in a surveillance exercise, let's put it that way, some time ago, and we were all plotted up at the start point where we believed the target was going to emerge, and that was outside Tate Britain. So there we all were, with all the relevant bits of kit, and we tested and retested, and we had an idea how we were going to rotate the teams and how the boxes were going to work and all the rest of it. And the time came when we were expecting the target to emerge, and nothing happened. And then we waited 10 more minutes and nothing happened. And I thought, something's going wrong here, isn't it? So I looked again at the notes, and it was Tate Modern rather than Tate Britain.
Oh dear. Yeah.
So there's a lesson. So double check your notes. So when you, in fact, sometimes one of the most interesting things I think about operating on the ground is you're so fixated on prep that it's very easy to lose sight of the most basic things. If you're getting down into the really granular elements of any operation, and actually you're losing sight of the obvious, like, are you at the right tape building for a start? And it's just given away the fact that I'm entirely unprofessional when it comes to surveillance.
It actually reminds me of, I don't know if you ever saw the slideshow, more than likely, of like the very first bit of basic training, and they've got the 2 spies meeting on the bridge, and the one's waiting on the top and the one's waiting underneath. It just makes me think of that. That came to mind straight away.
I'll tell you another story. These are, this is. I don't want your viewers to run away with the idea that I'm some sort of incompetent, but let's be honest, we all make mistakes, don't we? And there's one occasion, I write about it in my book, actually, and I was debriefing somebody in Luanda in Angola. And this was a private sector job, and a particular character concerned was very, very worried about their security. So we met in a hotel room. And one of the first things I did was to put up the sign saying, do not disturb. And about 15 minutes into the debrief, knock on the door. Both of us jump, heart in mouth. We go to open the door, and there's the cleaner. And I'm pointing at the sign. Oh no, I look at it again. I'd say, can't you read? And it was one of those double-sided signs. So one side said, do not disturb. The other sign said, please clean the room. I picked it up, assuming both sides were printed, do not disturb, and hung it up saying, please clean the room. It's those really minor details that can completely throw you when you've got everything else utterly under control. But you can it's so easy to overlook one major or even sometimes minor point that can have a really big impact on the way in which an operation works out.
Yeah, and to put into perspective here, that feeling you get when that door knocks, for anybody who's ever been asleep and they've dreamt that they're falling over and suddenly wake up with a start, that's the feeling that you get when that door knocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the telephone rings for no reason when you're meeting somebody in what's meant to be an entirely sanitized environment, and then the phone rings. Yeah. So I curse those cold callers who always seem to call at the most difficult moment to sell you double glazing.
And of course, it's the stories of when things go wrong and when things are challenging and how we get around them, that makes these things more fun. And because if anybody thinks that just because we're trained and intelligence officers that we go out into the world and everything's tickety-boo, there seems to be this kind of misconception that we're just brilliant at everything we do. We're always going to win the goldfish at the fair. And
yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, we talked a little bit, didn't we, about whether the world of spying, the world of intelligence, whether you're talking about private sector or public sector, is true to what we see on the screens or the other way around. And some movies that we watch, they are quite reasonably truthful. They are reasonably authentic. I'm thinking more like the Le Carre stuff. And certain parts of Slow Horses, although there are some far-fetched elements to that. But of course, I mean, I gave a talk the other day. I was in Sarajevo and I gave a talk the other day. And one of the first things I did was just say to people, okay, I want to get a sense of your perceptions about what spying is all about. So I just gave them all a piece of paper. So 25 people or so in the audience. And I said, just write down the one phrase or word or name that you associate with the word spying or espionage or intelligence, call it what you will.
Mm-hmm.
And they all wrote some down. I said, no, turn it over and forget about that. And at the end of the talk, I said, let's go through that exercise again, see if I've changed your perceptions. And then I did a straw poll. I said, how many people wrote James Bond at the outset? And about half the audience put up their hands. Now, fortunately, I'd shifted the dial, and the phrases that were then associated, or the associated phrases in most of their minds after I'd given a talk, were other, I think, more likely phrases, more authentic, more realistic phrases. But it's that James Bond franchise has a lot to answer for, and
it certainly does.
It sort of creates a sense of there being, I often say this, there's this idea that spies are somehow, intelligence officers are somehow superhuman or extraordinary or in possession of a set of skills that are closed to everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that they aren't, and they don't have access to those skills. They're not different. They're just people. They're just trained in a particular way. And that's really what led me to write the book, because I was thinking one day about how we have this image, there's a popular image out there, there's a popular idea that spies are going around having an awful lot of fun. And I thought, why should spies have all the fun? Actually, these are skill sets that are available to everybody for use in all sorts of ways. And why should we labor under this misapprehension that there's a substrata of the community that can do this and can use these skills, when in fact everybody can?
Yeah. And as we've discussed off screen, we're looking at doing an event as well that kind of ties in with your book, like a live in-person event, which will be absolutely wonderful to kind of bring the skills that you and I have for the public, because like you say, that it isn't a magic potion, and we're not bionic or anything like that. A lot of the time it's just being taught strategic methods of thinking, or just how to look at things or approach things differently, just from a slightly different angle, and plan through quite meticulously. And even then you can still hang the sign the wrong way around. So, but
Indeed.
The majority of the time,
have the double glazing salesperson call it exactly the wrong point.
Yep. And these are all things that happen to everybody. And like you say, it's not just about having these things and then panicking. It's about dealing with these things while irrelevant to what it is. We're also trying to kind of deal with it and carry on and still achieve our objective.
There's a flip side to my first book is called Think Like a Spy. I'm now turning my attention to a second book, which there's a working title that I have in mind, which is Act Like a Spy. And the point is that the first book is about the preparation, which you and I are talking about, how to turn a set of skills which are available to us all. The secret is they're not a secret. They are actually available to us all. We do use them all the time. but how to turn them to advantage by using them in a more intentful manner.
Mm-hmm.
What that doesn't capture, though, is exactly what you and I are talking about now, which is how to react when something in front of you isn't going the way that you're expecting it to go. And a lot of that comes down to teaching yourself muscle memory in how to respond rather than react. And how do you take that moment? I believe that in the military they call it, there's a phrase which is taking the knee, which is, I know that's been used in different ways as well, but what they mean by that is when under fire, first thing you do is reduce your profile, take the knee, literally just get down on the ground. But also it's a reference to teaching yourself to take that moment to think about what's going on here. Why is something going wrong? And how do I best respond rather than react?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, actually. I was talking about it with a friend of mine a while ago, and we were talking about the difference between kind of special forces training and MI6 training, and the fact that special forces will have you running over mountains through the cold and dunking your hands, say, in a bowl of ice or something, and then seeing if you have the ability to be able to pull the trigger of a pistol and accurately hit your target at the end of it all. Whereas MI6 is concentrating more on the fact that, do I have the mental capacity to be able to decide whether I'm making the right decision pulling the trigger? And that's what it's more about. It's more about the kind of, am I doing the right thing, more about than do I have the ability to, and taking that moment to pause and think through.
A few years back, I fronted a TV series on Channel 4 called Spies, and we put together an exercise precisely like that, where we took the participants. The idea was to take ordinary members of the public and see if they have what it takes to be a spy. And one of the things we did with them, this is about unfair now I think back on it, was to take them to a shooting range, gear them up with a hand pistol in front of a coconut, and then blindfold them and brief them. There's a threat to your 12 o'clock. What are you going to do? And I think 9 out of 10 people pulled the trigger, which of course is precisely the wrong thing to do. Not one of them stopped to say, what is the threat, and what am I dealing with here? Now, I say it was a bit unfair because now I think back on it, most people, if you give them a gun and tell them there's a threat in front of them, they're probably going to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And what that didn't prove that those 9 people who pulled the trigger don't have what it takes to be a spy. What it did prove is that they would need to be trained, mentored to think about things in another way, to think about threat in another way, and think about how to manage that threat in another way. And that's my point. That you can, all of these capabilities, these skills, interpersonal techniques are at our disposal, but we just don't necessarily know how to use them to best effect. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between an intelligence officer and 99% of people. And that's why I say, an old phrase of mine, intelligence officers are made, not born. We should also get the name down, because that way I can write it BOURNE.
Yeah, I like that. Funnily enough, I remember I had an argument with my wife many years ago over something that was posted online, and I had to give her a little bit of a lesson. And this is going way back to when social media was first finding its feet, as it were. And she'd reposted something about a person, and I said, "Look, delete that." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, first off, you don't know if it's true." I said, "It's not come from an authority." I said, and I'd gone through the explanations as to why. And because you'd get into arguments online with people. And I said, look, one of the most important things you're going to learn is not every action deserves a reaction. Yes. Just, at the end of the day, just because somebody's done something or said something doesn't mean to say you have to, do exactly the same. And that's very much
right. I can attest to that. So when you get your first stinker of a book review, the first thing you want to do is retaliate in kind, and then you think, no, actually, I can just let that pass. That probably says more about the person posting that review than it does about me.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, again, we've all had it. I had one not so long back. It actually worked out in my favour because I screenshot it and I put it on social media and I said, "Look at this! Somebody's left me a book review and 1 star and blah blah blah." And I said, "Well, first 1 star review, really disappointed." And I'm so grateful to like an army of friends that then went out and bought the book, read it, and left me a 5 star review in response to this 1 star review because they'd seen it and said, "Well, I'm going to read it for myself now." So it actually worked out in my favour. Somebody did it not so long back with it in a coffee shop, and they screenshot it. They put it on an A board outside their cafe, saying, "Come on in and try the worst coffee somebody's ever tried, according to the 1 star review on TripAdvisor."
Lovely. And I think this is that plays to something which a point I make again and again, that people are fundamentally quite good. You know, people are fundamentally quite supportive of one another. Of course, the keyboard warriors sat there behind their screens, putting the world to rights from their slightly perverted point of view. We have to make an exception for, and that's why I keep saying to people, get away from the screens, for God's sake, get out there and engage in the real world.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, people are very good. There's a great story, actually. I know we're slightly going off on a tangent into the world of authorship rather than the world of espionage, but I think it's just very quickly worth telling this story. I don't know who the author is. I need to look up the story again. But she posted a picture on Twitter of herself at a book signing with the room absolutely empty. And the tweet saying, this is sometimes what it's like to be an author. And I think we all understand that feeling. And the tweet got picked up by somebody famous. Could have been J.K. Rowling, possibly. That's ringing a bell in the back of my mind. Doesn't matter if it was or it wasn't. It was somebody famous who retweeted it. And overnight, that woman's book went from being nowhere to being a bestseller. Because fundamentally, people want to be supportive and they want to help the underdog. And I think that's one of the most marvelous things that you learn, actually, in the whole career of intelligence and espionage, that in the end, people are most of the time driven by very solid motivations and they want to help out,
Yeah.
And they want to do the right thing. And I tell a story in the book about an occasion when a friend of mine who's an activist journalist in a country in Africa feared for his life. And I was able to persuade a friend of mine who was a police officer and happened to be a private pilot's license holder to spirit him out of the country. And the risk that police officer took was exceptional. But she was doing the right thing, and she knew she was doing the right thing. And it worked out in her favour in the end, for reasons I won't reveal right now. I think people can go and buy the book and find out for themselves. But the point being, she was driven by the right motives. And there was a conflict there, of course there was, between what should I be doing as a police officer in this autocratic state in which he was working, and what should I be doing as a human? What should I be doing as another human being? And eventually my appeal to that aspect of her personality won through.
Yeah, and
it was the right thing.
Well, that's it. And this is where we went in. I remember kind of my mentor when I was going through training. One of the things he told me was, if somebody's not your enemy, then they're potentially your friend. And and you probably wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of people probably would be surprised at the amount of times I've knocked on the doors of complete strangers or gone into businesses of people where I haven't known, and I've relied on them for help. And these people have gone above and beyond purely because of the situation that I'm in, and without too much of an explanation sometimes, or with very little in the way of detail, just know that I'm a fellow human in need of help. And
no, that's absolutely right. And we're reluctant to ask for help. But a point I frequently make is people do want to help. It makes us feel good. We're social creatures. No man, no woman is an island. And we like to help our fellow humans, and that's a fabulous thing. That's a great part of being alive. That we're surrounded by people who do want to help out, and it's extraordinary, isn't it? If you think about how quickly people react if somebody takes a tumble, or heaven
Yeah.
forbid, somebody's knocked over by a car like I was when I was 12. I walked out in front of the car. It's a different story. I won't go into the reasons why right now. But one of the things that struck me straight away was just how many people reacted. How many people came running out in their pajamas, in their dressing gowns to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we forget that at our peril, actually. And one of the things I say to everybody is, don't be afraid to ask for help, because people want to give it to you. And that goes across the board.
Mm-hmm.
We can say, all think of cases where that's absolutely the case for intelligence officers. Like the story I tell about the policewoman who helped my friend get across the border. That was an instinct to help. That's an instinct to be a good person. But it can work in so many different contexts. Asking for help from somebody to help you find a new job. Asking for help from somebody to, I don't know, give you a good review, whatever it might be. But people do it in the end. And what I think we tend to forget and we become quite shy about is asking. And that goes even into the arena of mental health. We're all too afraid. We're all wanting to present ourselves as rock steady and very capable and self-sustaining. But in actual fact, sometimes just that simple act of asking and acknowledging that you need help and asking for help is probably one of the most powerful things you can do, all the way across the board.
Yeah, and I think social media has probably played a big part in that as well, because a lot of people seem to have like an online persona, and they don't want to kind of burst that bubble by going somewhere and being the one asking for help rather than giving it. But like you say, I've been in many situations, and one thing I have found, and I don't know whether you've had the same kind of experience as me, more than likely, but the less people have, the more they're willing to give. Because they know what it's like to have nothing and to be stuck.
Yeah. That's extraordinarily true. I've been very fortunate in most of my career to work in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've worked with a lot of people who have very little, but they will give you half of what they don't have. And that's the extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
Without question. And I think, if we were all, if more people realized that fundamental truth about human nature, the whole world would be a great deal better, a better place to be. But this is a positive story, isn't it? And actually, if we let's just bring this back to the whole thing about espionage. In the end, as we've said, there's an idea that spies are somehow superhuman or extraordinary in some ways. But in actual fact, think about what they're doing. Ultimately, if a spy goes abroad and they identify somebody who's in possession of classified information, which might be to the detriment of their host country to reveal, but to the advantage of humanity, and the spy asks that person to reveal that information, to become an agent, to become somebody who is an informant, to become a traitor. Let's face it, that's what the spy is asking that person to do. What are they doing? What they're actually doing is asking for help.
Yeah, true. Yeah, very true.
In the end, so that's a massive grappling hook into anybody's emotions, asking for help. I just say to everybody, just try it at some point. Maybe not necessarily going abroad and getting somebody to become a traitor, but in a slightly less dramatic fashion, perhaps.
Yeah, and it goes alongside with a conversation I was having a while ago when somebody said to me, define the kind of the word spy. I mean, because and you and I know that the word spy is actually the wrong word. It's actually intelligence officer. But the spy is generally the person that the intelligence officer recruits to bring the information. But Hollywood again seems to, with spy novels and spy fiction and spy movies, seems to have given the impression that the spy is actually the person working for the agency. Depending on
you're venturing into a minefield there, linguistic.
Yeah.
We all use these phrases interchangeably.
That's it.
Without stopping to define them. Now, as it happens in Think Like a Spy, I use the word solely to refer to the intelligence officer.
Yeah.
And
I do exactly the same.
Others may disagree and, as you say, consider the person who's reporting the agent to be the spy. It's not helped by the fact that in the US, the word agent is usually used to refer to the officer, the FBI, the CIA agent. And the person that they're recruiting is the target or the source or the asset.
Yeah.
So it's as well, I think, early on in any conversation about these things to be clear about what you mean. For me, I reserve the word spy to mean intelligence officer.
Yeah, and myself and so many others do as well, just for ease of use. With like I say, we get onto these things. Like you say, it does become a minefield. People have asked me before. They said, "Why don't you write a book of all the different abbreviations, acronyms?" And I said, and they said, and this was meant to be globally. And I said, there are that many different acronyms, and that are. I said, if you were to just go with one agency, just the military, for example, there are countless. I said, never mind going interagency, and I said it would be just an absolute nightmare to try and to put something like that together.
It would be a work worthy of Dr. Johnson himself. Yeah. And I'm not sure anybody would thank you for it, by the way.
No.
Let's face it, part of the allure of the whole world of intelligence is its mystery. So I'm involved in something of a paradox in trying to help people to understand that those skills, that set of skills, those techniques that are used by spies are actually available to us all. To democratize, if you like, to use a fancy word, a set of interpersonal skills that are actually available to all. In a way, that's stripping away some of the mystique, and that people don't often thank you for that. If you look at the way a Le Carré film grosses at the box office compared to how a Bond film grosses at the box office, I think you'll see what I mean. There's an order of magnitude in the difference. Billions in one case, and maybe a few hundred million in the other.
Yeah.
Why do people really? So here's another question. I put it to you actually. Do people really want the world of espionage to be demystified?
Probably not. I mean, I often explain this as kind of people when they go and they watch a magic trick or a show and a magician, they see the magician perform all these tricks and they're in awe of what appears to be fantastic illusions. But once you show them how these tricks are done, the magic is not only is it gone, but generally people are so disappointed. They're like, "Oh, is that it?"
Yes.
And that's very much like the world of espionage. If we were to pull the curtain back completely and say this is from A to Z how it's done, they would probably go, "Really? Is that it?"
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, very much so.
But there's another layer to that. It gets a bit meta because actually, in some ways, the revelation of the simplicity of what some espionage involves is itself fascinating.
Oh yeah.
That realization of what we're all capable of doing, so long as we bring intent to our actions and intent to our interpersonal connections, is quite awesome, actually. Yeah, it's it gets a bit frightening too, and that's why I always say you have to think very carefully about doing all of this, using these skills with great integrity. But it's pretty awesome. You are I remember going back years and years now to late teens, and somebody once said to me, we were talking about soccer, and I was talking about how bad I am at anything to do with hand-eye coordination. And she just looked at me and she said, "Don't be ridiculous. You're capable of doing anything if you turn your mind to it." And at the time I shrugged and I thought, that's not true, is it? And then I went away and I thought about it. And actually, I think it probably is true. Obviously there are certain physical limitations that we all have. But the basic truth of what she said is undeniable. That if we turn our minds to it, most of what we want is reasonably accessible, actually.
Yeah.
It's about a mindset, it's about self-awareness, but it's also about finding the right allies in life. It's about finding the right people to support you to get there. And for me, the important thing is winning allies let's think about that phrase. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the most important thing is you can have some control over both those things. You can have a certain amount of control over both what you know by studying hard and all the rest of it and all those good things that our parents told us to do. But you can have some control over who you know. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually said many times, from the old, and I can't remember who originally said the quote, but it was, "You are the mean average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." And
yeah, I like that. That's great.
Yeah. So your peers definitely do influence you. And I said this to my stepson. I said, look, if you hang around with 5 drug addicts, you will be the 6th. If you hang around with 5 millionaires, you will be the 6th. You choose your company wisely. But what you were saying there, I mean, this goes into one of the lessons that I'm going to be giving in this live event, and how we approach things differently. There was somebody who I knew who he got made redundant. He didn't know what to do. He was at a loss, and I sat him down and I said, "What have you always wanted to do?" And he said, "You'll laugh at me." And I said, "You're talking to me." I said, "Please, indulge." And he said, "Okay." He said, "I've always wanted to be a helicopter pilot." He said, "But it costs so much money and blah 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 blah, and the odds are so stacked against me. The chances of being able to do it are really really slim." And I sat him down and come up with a plan. He's now a helicopter pilot. And it was really, really quite simple. Down the road, there's a company called Heli Operations. And I said, what we do? I said, we'll start by getting you a job there. And he said, well, how do we get a job? He says, they haven't advertised for months. I said, no. I said, don't wait for them to advertise a job. I said, because you've got 2 problems then. One, you're going up against a crowd of other people. I said, and 2, you 9 times out of 10, these jobs are gone before they're even advertised. I said, what we're going to do, we're going to go down to Heli Operations and we're going to create you a job. And
they don't even know exists yet, but it's
exactly
yours.
So what we did is there's a cafe down, more or less opposite where 1 or 2 of the staff members go at lunchtime, and I taught him the very very basics of targeting, and we got to know the right person who works in Heli Operations, and just got into conversation, as you do, about kind of what improvements could be made within Heli Operations. And they said a particular area, and I said, oh well, this gentleman here, that's his speciality, and that was where we then worked on opening the door for him. We left, and he said, but I don't really know too much about that. So I picked a book off my shelf by Greg Hartley, I think it is, that says How to Be an Expert in Anything in a Week or whatever it is. So there you go. I said, read that and learn it. Go and apply. And that's what happened.
It's a great story, and I think it really. And your friend ended up as a helicopter pilot.
Yeah. He took the job there. He was sponsored by the company. He ended up with a contract, and he ended up working there and getting his helicopter license. And then he's since left, and he's now working somewhere else. But he's still as a helicopter pilot now. And that's just one of the examples of how you and I would approach something, as opposed to
just stealing my thunder, because at this event, which I'm hoping we'll both be involved in, and really looking forward to planning it with you. More to follow later, because I think it's going to be a really exciting opportunity for the select few people who are able to join us. I was thinking about talking about exactly the same thing: the difference between targeting and networking. And I found over the years that people who have amazing networks say, oh, I know this person, they can give you a hand. I know that person, they can give you a hand. This other person who can give you a hand. And they reach out all over the place and nothing happens. And then there are other people, and I include you in this number, Gavin, because since you and I met, you've been an absolute fount of wisdom and an incredible introducer to some really interesting people. And you made things happen. And I think the difference is they network, you target.
Yeah.
And understanding the difference between social networking, sort of the social media stuff behind the desk, building up large numbers of followers, and interpersonal networking and targeting. Understanding the difference and the place of those 3 things in itself is a really powerful tool that enables you to unlock a hell of a lot that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. And I've told this story to you before, so forgive me, Gavin, I'm going to tell it again, but, I wanted the best name as a referee on my CV. And so I decided to go and find the most recognizable name I could to work for somebody. I was happening to work at the time in the Houses of Parliament. And I thought, well, who's the person who, if he appears as a referee on my CV, is going to grab most attention? And it was Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. Not the original Winston Churchill, who was long dead by then, but his grandson. And I targeted him. I make no bones about the fact. I found out what his interests were, and I found out where his office was, and I put myself in the places where I was expecting him to be, and I became quickly versed in all of those areas of interest that he had talked about in the chamber. And I made sure that I was in a position to talk to him about those subject matters, and eventually asked him if he was looking for a researcher, and he wasn't, but he did happen to be looking for a speechwriter. So guess what? Suddenly I became a speechwriter.
Yeah.
So it's all about, it's the mix, isn't it? It's the targeting, the power of targeting, getting the right person or the right people on your side, and the power of presenting yourself in a way that is attractive to them.
Yeah.
There's a great phrase I've just written about on my Substack. And I was writing about the movie Withnail and I, because not many people recognize that actually throughout that whole movie, Withnail was thinking like a spy. In his dealings with Uncle Monty, they're trying to, you may remember that he and Marwood, the I in the movie title, are trying to persuade somebody to pay for them to have a delightful weekend in the country. And they alight upon Uncle Monty, who owns a place in the country. They target him, they cultivate him, they adopt cover, they assess his motivations, they recruit him, and then they continue to exert influence over him, one way or another. And what's really interesting, there's a phrase, Withnail at one point presents Marwood as an old Etonian to Uncle Monty. And Marwood tackles him about this, says, what is all this? Why are you telling him I went to Eton? And great phrase. Withnail just says, I'm simply trying to present you in a context that he can make sense of. And I think that is probably the purest distillation of what I call offensive cover that I've ever heard. Now, in that case, it involved a lie. But in many, many cases, it needn't involve a lie. It's the presentation of yourself in a way that the person you're dealing with or the people you're dealing with can make sense of. It might be that you have to lose an accent, for instance. It might be that you have to learn certain phrases. It might be that you have to be able to present yourself as a speechwriter. It might be that you have to be able to present yourself as a future helicopter pilot. But there's the point. What's the word I've used all the way through that? It's present yourself, isn't it?
That's it, yeah.
And I guess in a phrase, it's not fake it till you make it. It's fake it till you become it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the principle's relatively simple. You're making yourself fit in a gap that's being created. That rather than somebody trying to find something that's the right shape, to use your square peg kind of analogy, you're making yourself in the shape of the hole. You're making yourself with a peg that fits whatever hole and size and shape needs to be. So yeah, and that's
and why not? There's nothing wrong with that. Some people say, but isn't that a bit manipulative? Isn't that exploitative? Isn't that somehow unethical? And I say, absolutely not. We all have. We're all a blank template to begin with, and upbringing and genes to a certain extent will mold us one way or another. But in the end, we make decisions. You decide somewhere along the line: are you going to be a STEM subject devotee, or are you going to go into the arts? You're going to waste your time studying philosophy like I did, or are you going to go and do something useful like engineering? But those are decisions. And we can make those decisions about how we present ourselves and that part of our personality that we want to show to the world or to a part of the world from minute to minute almost. And it's that flexibility. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of our discussion. You're prepared to be flexible.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably one of the best traits any intelligence officer can have, is that dynamic flexibility to be able to, like you say, adapt to any situation.
I totally agree. You've got to fade into the foreground.
I like that.
And that's about working out how you fit into the picture that somebody looking at you is seeing. And that's where others' awareness comes in. I say there are three legs upon which the stool of espionage balances. And one is self-awareness, the second one is others' awareness, and the third one is situational awareness. And if you can master those three, well, master's a big, that's a tall order, but if you can get a handle on each of those,
become proficient.
You're a long way towards thinking like a spy and being able to achieve things like a spy.
Definitely. Now, I'm going to swing things a slightly different way here, because earlier on you mentioned Slow Horses, which I've recently been binge watching. Now, I might be wrong here, but I'm sure I read that you helped out a little bit with that. Is that right?
I was a technical advisor on the first 2 seasons, I think, credited as such, and I was very privileged to work alongside some of the key figures on it, some of the key actors involved. I did one particularly fun experience was running a surveillance exercise with Jack Loudon, River Cartwright, and Olivia Cook, his co-star. Olivia's character very sadly was blown up, I think, fairly early in season 1. But yeah, we ran around London a bit, running a surveillance exercise, which I like to think was reflected by Jack Loudon in his presentation of his character. It's always tempting. I've done a fair amount of these sorts of technical advisory roles on adaptations of espionage books, and it's always tempting to look and wonder whether some tick or some way of delivering themselves is drawn from yourself. But we can see a lot of stuff that isn't there if we look hard enough. But no, it's great fun, and it's a fascinating take on the whole world of espionage. Actually, what I like about it, and I think the reason why it's shaken up the whole genre in the way that it has, is that Mick Heron picked up on something you and I were talking about, which is people make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And just because you, excuse the phrase, balls up in one exercise, which Cartwright does at the very beginning of the first season, very beginning of the first book, Slow Horses, doesn't mean that you're terminally useless. And I think that's another lesson that people need to learn, that it's, make a mistake, pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and get on with it. And I think Slow Horses speaks to that aspect of our personalities. It really does. It's a very positive portrayal in some ways.
Oh,
and it's a much more realistic portrayal in other ways than some other franchises. And I take my hat off to Heron for doing that, actually, to be able to take the vulnerability of some of the people who become who work for those agencies and turn them to dramatic effect. That's a hell of an achievement.
Yeah, and again, it does kind of reinforce what we were saying earlier about the kind of rooting for the underdog situation. The guys at Slough House are all there because of the fact that they, like you say, ballsed up, and at the end of the day, like you say, they're not indefinitely useless. And this goes back to a psychological experiment. Have you ever heard of a psychology experiment called learned helplessness?
I haven't. Tell me more. I'm all ears.
It was a lovely little experiment. I won't rattle on for ages. I love psychology anyway, but basically what they did is they filled a classroom with 2 lots of people, and the people on the left were given one lot of sheets the other were given, and they all thought they were having identical sheets, but there was basically two halves to the classroom. And to summarize it, they were given, I think it was, they were given two different sets of letters, and they were told to make words out of the letters. And anyway, long and short of it is, the ones on the left hand side, they were all wrong, and you couldn't make any words out of the letters that they were given. The ones on the right hand side, they were all easy, and they made all the right words. And the long and short of it is, they asked them afterwards, who got words and who didn't, and people were like, on the left weren't putting their hand up. So they give them the second sheet. Interestingly, when they give them the second sheet, they were both really, really easy. And the ones that had done well on the first one did okay. The ones that failed on the first one, they didn't even try. Even though they were really easy, they'd actually thought, this is impossible, I can't do it. They'd convinced themselves they couldn't do it, and therefore didn't even try. Or if they did try, didn't begin.
It's fascinating, and I think we see that so many times in life, don't we? Somebody maybe doesn't get the job that they want on the first time of trying, and they give up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the worst thing you can do, is giving up.
Yeah,
you've got to keep going back, and if you can't manage to get your goals one way, find another way of doing it. Find a different set of allies. Find a different approach, rather than just saying, okay, I'm no good at this. I mean, I can't really speak, because I tell people constantly how bad I am at any ball game involving hand-eye coordination, and that's I've told myself that for 50 years plus. The reality is, if I put my mind to it, I probably wouldn't be that bad. But you get stuck in these narratives,
mm-hmm.
and it's important not to. And interestingly, just building on that more widely, you mentioned that you are fascinated by psychology, and I am too. And throughout things like a spy, I refer to some fascinating psychological experiments, because we're not psychologists. But we have to be, I think, to get on in the world of intelligence in any way, shape, or form, you have to be something of an amateur psychologist,
mm-hmm.
and you have to recognize you have to become familiar with the way in which people, as a whole, generally tend to work. And being an enthusiastic amateur of the science of psychology, I think, is an important thing, and we all gain from that. Actually, it's after all, in the end, it's a study of what we are and how we act, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But on that note, I think one of the most unintended positive reviews that I've had about my book is somebody said, well, it doesn't tell me anything I didn't already know. And I leaned forward, this was face to face, and I said, that's the point. The point I'm making throughout is that all of these skills that we think are used to such extraordinary ends, and they are extraordinary ends. Let's be under no illusion. A human intelligence officer goes abroad and persuades other people to betray their country or their cause at risk of imprisonment, humiliation, potentially even execution and torture.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. But the way in which they do it is not what they do, precisely what they do and how they do, and what they do it for. That's rightly a secret. But the process by which they do it is they use a set of skills which is available to us all.
Mm-hmm.
So in actual fact, when you draw the curtain back and you understand what it is that professional spies do, you shouldn't be surprised, because in the end, they're human beings using human interpersonal skills. They're just doing it slightly differently
mm-hmm.
from the way in which most of us use those interpersonal skills day to day. They're doing it with intent, and they're doing it in a targeted fashion. So, yeah, I say to my friend who said, you didn't teach me anything new, that's the point. And in fact, ironically, paradoxically, I've taught you something new there, because you didn't realize that before.
Yeah, which is like you say, it's just about the the application process of something that we're already doing naturally every day, but like you say, doing it with intent. And I love that, because it's not happening by accident. Now, you're still working in the private sector at the moment, is that right?
I do. I've worked in private intelligence now for longer than I care to remember. I run a small company which specialises in human intelligence gathering in Africa, called Africa Integrity. When I'm not writing or giving talks or appearing on YouTube channels. Good friends like yourself, Gavin.
Brilliant. And so if anybody's wanting to get in touch with you regarding anything like that, where's the best place for them to be able to find you?
If it's professionally on the Africa side, then there's a website, africa-integrity.com. On the writing side, public speaking and so on, my author website is julesfisher.com, all one word, JULESFISHER.com. And if anybody is interested in reading my ruminations on the unexpected place of spying techniques in movies like With Nell and I or Schindler's List, next up is going to be The Talented Mr. Ripley. Then they can read about it at my Substack, julianfisher.substack.com.
Brilliant. And if you haven't already seen it or got it, this is the book right here. I highly recommend it. I'm enjoying every moment. I haven't quite finished it to the very last page, but I am enjoying what I've read so far. So there will be a glowing review there coming up for that one. And yeah, thank you, Jules. Very much appreciated. All reviews, all honest reviews, good, bad, and indifferent, are very, very welcome. And I say this every time, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, tell me what they think about the book, then the contact form on julesfisher.com doesn't just disappear into the ether, it comes straight into my personal inbox, and I'd be delighted to engage. Brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks so much, Gavin.